All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of 11 Yanks Breakdown. Today, I have some exciting people with me. Filippo Silva from Tactical Manager, who you all know already, and Justin Moran, a writer for Stars and Stripes FC. Justin, I've been psyched to have you on the channel for a while, and I've been trying to figure out the best time to do it. I found Justin on Twitter. He has a lot of very rational, reasonable, logical takes, defends himself pretty well with arguments, and somebody that I think would provide a lot of value to everybody on the channel. So Justin, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's exciting to be on with you guys. I'm just very pumped, and it's so fun to talk about this stuff and to add data to the conversation, hopefully add some insight to the conversation.
Certainly. I mean, Filippo and I, we do a post-game live stream after every game, but after an international window, we like to, wait a week, take a step back, decompress, look at everything from a bigger picture, and then also bring on somebody else to give their thoughts and their opinion. I talk about diversity of opinion being important in the soccer landscape. So we like to bring on somebody different every time, and we're psyched to have you.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys, before we dive into it, and we are going to talk about the World Cup qualifying window that just passed, in which the USMNT got 5 points out of a possible 9. Before we do, however, we're recording on a morning where the ticket prices for the Mexico game in, I believe, Cincinnati were just released. Am I right so far?
Yes.
Yes, and I think there seems to be...
Released or leaked, right? I don't know if they were released or leaked. I can't remember right now.
Yeah, one or the other. Whether they were officially released or leaked, it does seem to be correct. Now, there is some debate about, are those tickets too high, right? And I think just to start off, the cheapest possible tickets are $115, and the most expensive tickets, I believe, are over $400 or $500. If I'm,
there's $1,000.
There's $1,000. Over $1,000.
No, I don't know if it was over. I think there were tickets at $1,000, I believe.
At $1,000. Anyways, there or thereabouts. Guys, real quick, give me your takes on this issue, because there does seem to be some debate about it. Filippo, why don't you start?
Yeah, I'm not very for it, right? Because I think when you do so, we have this federation that loves to brag about making more money than getting more people involved with the sport. And I understand they're a nonprofit, but nonprofits have to run a profit to grow the sport and invest in it. But here's the thing. One way to invest the sport in this country is to get more people involved, families, people to go to the stadium. So if you're a dad and you have 2 kids, a wife, they have to take the stadium, and the tickets are $400, $300. That's over $1,000 that you're going to spend, plus parking, plus whatever it is. So you exclude a lot of people out of it, right?
Yeah.
And I know they're going to say the stadium's going to get packed regardless. Maybe it will. Probably it will, right? It probably will, because it's USA and Mexico. But that's missing the point. The point is, when you put lower tickets, you're not excluding people that can afford it. You're just including people that can't afford the expensive. The people that can afford the expensive ones, they can afford the cheaper ones. So you're just including more people to fight for tickets, try to buy it. There's the secondary market argument as well, which I'm not going to get into because it's going to be a little bit too long here. I'm not very for jacking up. You don't try to exploit the fans. You try to include the fans.
Mm-hmm. Justin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm with you, Filippo. It's the idea of, are you trying to get as much money as you can immediately, or are you actually investing long-term? Because what's crazy to me sometimes is that businesses, and USSF in this case, make decisions that actually are going to make them less money in the future, because they're not going to have this massive fan base, this massive amount of people who are really, really excited to come to the games, like you're saying, because people aren't being introduced to the games. So maybe you have like cheaper tickets for kids 12 and under. Maybe you find a way to just have, we talked about having bigger stadiums that can still have a good playing surface, and now your capacity is twice as much. And so you don't feel like you have to jack the prices up quite so high. There are some interesting arguments, because it's a qualifier, because it's against Mexico. People are talking about the strategies and how do we make sure that there are US fans in the game and that it's not a whole bunch of L3 fans. Mm-hmm. But that's only one piece of it. We also just spent the most of 4 years playing friendlies, starting back in 2018. And we could have been doing this strategy for the years where you can have cheaper prices, families, kids, and grow the game, grow the love of the game for those people.
Can I add to that, Pete, real quick? I liked what he said there. So one of the claims is that they do this to exclude L3 fans, right? To get more Americans. So how about you grow the sport in the country and you'll naturally get more Americans into the stadium? That's a.
Yeah,
how
I'm
about
not
that?
convinced that I think L3 fans will pay more for tickets than American fans will.
Agree.
They
Agree.
love their team and they travel and they're willing to pay for it. So I don't even know that that's a valid
They
argument.
have money too in the U.S. They
Yeah.
have money. They can afford it.
Yeah.
The thing is, a lot of the arguments are based on economics, right? And they say, well, they know how much people will pay. And so, therefore they can charge whatever they want. All the arguments in terms of profits and it being a capitalist, endeavor are that, like, if your only remit is profits, then all those arguments make sense. But you cannot tell me that the U.S. Soccer Federation, which is A, a nonprofit, and B, responsible for the national teams for the entire country. They belong to the country, to the people. Those are our national teams. I don't think they have the right to exclude anyone but upper middle class and up individuals from paying for tickets. And I believe that's what they're doing with this price gouging. Yes, there will be some people who scrimp and save and try to put it on a credit card who maybe can't afford it. But generally what you're doing is saying, if you're not at least upper middle class, you can't afford to come to games of your national team. And to me, that's kind of a disgrace.
Well, and Pete, we can add to that one thing before we move on with the video as well. For example, I'm not wealthy. I'm not poor. Just talking about myself. All right. Can I afford these tickets? Yes.
Yeah.
Am I a fanatic for soccer? Yes. Am I willing to pay $300-$400 for a good ticket?
No.
Yeah, if I'm going to go watch Messi and Ronaldo playing the World Cup, not if I'm going to go watch Gregg Berhalter's tactics with Jassy Zardes playing up top against Funes Mori. I'm not going to go watch that. So they need to understand what product they have. And at that point, what they're bringing to the stadiums are not even fanatics, are just people that have money to throw on the trash can at this point. No offense to them. You can throw your money wherever you want. But you need to have some, and I know I'm done with this. I will let you go.
No, that's fine. I mean, look, I think you're 100% right. And I think we're all very much on the same page about this. I've seen arguments to the contrary. All of those arguments to me come from a point of view that basically says they're in charge and they can charge whatever they want. And if people are willing to pay for it, they're right. And you should all shut up. So I don't agree with those arguments. But we've talked
Pete,
about
like
that.
You said, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Justin.
Well, like you said, even if their only goal was money, you said there's so many more aspects to it than just making money. Even if all they cared about was that, it would still make more sense to keep those price points lower so that more people can be exposed to the game. You have a larger fan base, people who are passionate about it. And as that grows, they would still make more in the long run. So it's incredibly short-sighted.
For sure. And I think just the fact that they have in the past openly bragged about, increasing profits and increasing revenue while reducing, actual in-stadium capacity, not capacity, but actual tickets sold, tells you exactly where they're at with this whole thing. There's no argument that they're doing it because of resale of tickets. Like, that argument just goes out of the window. But we've spent plenty of time on that. Let's get into discussing the World Cup qualifier, World Cup qualifying window that just passed. We played 3 games, drew away 0-0 in El Salvador, drew at home with Canada 1-1, and then managed to get a 4-1 win in Honduras. Guys, before we get into the X's and O's and breaking it all down, I thought we could start with grading the window, just on an overall. Filippo and I grade players and the coach after each game. But if we just look at this window from an A+ to F-, the way we did in school perspective, where would you grade the USMNT on this window?
Who's going first?
Anyone. Justin, you start.
Okay, I gave us a D. I think we were trending toward an F about halftime in Honduras. But obviously the comeback was, it changed everything. We went from a 2-point window to a 5-point window. I have a lot on this. Are you okay if I go for a minute?
Well, right now we're just grading, and then we'll get into all the details for sure.
Grade and I'm out. It's a D.
Right, so we have a D from Justin. Filippo.
I agree with what he was saying. I'm going to be a little nicer. I'm going to give a C. And the only reason I'm giving a C is because technically we're qualifying in the moment. That is the only reason. And that is the bare minimum. And usually a C, right, is the bare minimum to pass or whatever.
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, so that's why I'm giving it a C or a C-. Or just
D's
C,
get degrees, I've heard, but I don't know how true that is.
It's getting them to the World Cup.
Or is it C's get degrees?
Only thing they have going for them is that they're qualifying right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm with you both. I'm going to give a C- as well. Like he said, it was trending towards F, except for that last 45 minutes in Honduras. So not great overall, and we'll break it all down and we will discuss it. But the only reason those grades are not worse is because we did manage to hit the top 3 by the end of the window. Let's talk about it, guys. And, let's start by talking about the positive, right? Because, we try to start that way. Let's each of us give 2 things. They could be player performances or sort of bigger picture issues that we thought were positive takeaways from this window. Filippo, do you want to start?
Yeah, the first one I want to say is we got an away win.
Mm-hmm.
I know it wasn't very pretty, and 4-1 was not really what the game was, right? It's a little misleading, the result.
No. Yeah.
It could have gone either way, but 4-1 makes it seem like it was an easy win, and it was never easy. So I think getting an away win, which a lot of some of the accounts and mainstream media kept thinking it was impossible, we got a win against Honduras away. And do you want me to give you my second one too?
Yeah.
I thought it was a positive the way the fan base overall reacted towards it, right? Everyone was happy we got a win in the final game away. But at the same time, you could see the frustration and a lot of the fans, not all, but most of the fans seeing the issues. So I thought that was a big positive because we haven't seen that in the past.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
Yeah. I think oftentimes we have let results cover up some pretty bad performances,
Mm-hmm.
All right, Justin.
Yeah, I think mine is along very similar lines of what Filippo said. One of the biggest talking points in the window is how difficult CONCACAF is, how difficult qualifying is, especially on the road. And these expectations are set that, a draw is the best we can do. We're not going to explode and score a lot of goals. The surface is going to be bad. All of these things are going to make it impossible for us to play the way we really should with the talent that we have. And so to come into the camp with 20 players on the original roster who had 0 World Cup qualifying caps, and then for those guys to get a win away, to have an explosion of goals, so 4 goals in 45 minutes, to come from behind because we were trailing 1-0, and then to actually overcome a sluggish start as well because the performance was so miserable in the first 45. So to have all those things happen should give them a great amount of confidence going into the next window. They've done it. They've won away. They've scored a bunch of goals away. They've come back, and they've even started badly and still won. So they know they can do it now, and I don't want to hear those excuses. Hopefully no one else falls for those anymore either.
Yep. All right. My 2 are the big one for me was that Miles Robinson's performances in the Gold Cup translated into World Cup qualifying. And it doesn't always work that way. We saw a lot of players who were excellent or pretty good in Gold Cup, and it doesn't always translate into World Cup qualifying. So I think the fact that Miles Robinson proved that he can be a solid, reliable center back, even if he isn't perfect. I know there's still issues with his distribution, at least long-range distribution sometimes is not perfect. But overall, he does the job of a center back. And I think, in a center back depth chart that's still a little wonky, I think that was good to see. My second big takeaway issue is similar to Justin's. The fact that the team showed the spirit to make that comeback in the second half was good. What that will do is in the future, it will remind them that we have that capacity, that we can go away and win, and that we don't need to sit down and accept the excuse of you can't win away in CONCACAF. It's just too hard. If you can win 4-1 away in Honduras, which, by the way, nobody had won in Honduras during World Cup qualifying for 28 years. So that stat is quite pertinent. So it can be done. And we have the talent and the depth and the ability to do it. And I think showing that both to the players and also to the fans and to the media, like Justin said, should prevent future future issues or future excuses like you just can't win away in CONCACAF. But I think from a morale point of view, it was really good for the team to get that comeback win. And I hope it will certainly, carry over into the next window, that confidence and that fierce, determination to come back no matter the circumstances or environment. All right. So I think those were the positives. Let's get into the issues. And there was lots of issues to discuss. What 2 issues did you come? I'm sure there's probably more than 2, but I think between the 3 of us, we can come up with 6 solid issues that presented themselves during these qualifiers. Justin, why don't you start?
Yeah, we didn't create nearly enough good chances. Our midfield was probably the biggest weakness. We didn't progress the ball through the midfield into the attack. And so when attackers like Pulisic and Reina got in the ball, they were having to drop really deep and receive it in positions where they're not threatening, they're not dangerous. It makes it easier for them to be defended, to be hacked, double teamed. Even if you give up a foul then for the opponent, we're not even in a position to get a dangerous free kick, and then they're much more likely to be injured because of that. If you look at the central midfield pairings, we did McKinney and Aronson against El Salvador. Aronson, not a strong central midfielder. Great attacker, great out on the wing, but he's not that physical presence that's going to win duels and help us go through the middle of the field. And then against Canada at home, it was Acosta and Leggett. Leggett's good in the final third, not necessarily going to be that guy who receives it from the center backs and pushes through all the way to give it to Pulisic or Reina in those good positions. Acosta is a 6. His defensive work is great. I don't think he's shown that role for the U.S. I think we saw this past window, he should be the 6 backup, not a fullback, not a box-to-box midfielder. And then the final game, I heard it called a 7-0-3 formation. We had 2 defensive midfielders with a back 5 and then the 3 attackers. So our quote-unquote central mids, the pairing was Sands and Acosta. Those are not 2 players, again, who are going to link, who are going to push through the midfield, who have the quality on the ball. We do have those players with McKinney, Reina, Yunus Musa. We have a few others in our pool as well. It's a steep drop-off after those 3, but that central midfield's inability to bring the ball forward was one of the biggest problems. That was a long time on that one. Players out of position was my second one. One of you guys probably has that on your list as well.
Yeah, a lot of players out of position. Can we just quickly recap which players played out of position at some point in this window? Certainly Serginho Dest, certainly Tyler Adams, in my opinion, Gio Reyna, Brendan Aronson, Kellen Acosta.
I would throw James Sands in there as well because he was playing that 8 role when he's really a center back or a 6.
Right.
I think even Brooks, when he played as a central center back on that 3 in the back with a hole in the midfield, technically he was out of position as well, or at least out of his role, at least.
Yeah. Josh Sargent was out of position, certainly against Honduras in the final game. So we see this a lot with Gregg Berhalter. And it's interesting, Justin, that you talk about our lack of ability to create from midfield, because this wasn't an issue that's just specific to this qualifying window, right? It was also specific to both the Gold Cup and the Nations League. And for somebody who has talked relentlessly about our ability to use the ball to disorganize the opponent and create scoring chances, that's one of the things we've been worst at, under Gregg Berhalter, and it's been 3 years. So, I mean, we'll talk a little bit about that some more, but I think it's interesting that continues to be an issue for us. But Filippo, why don't you give us your 2?
Yeah, essentially it all goes down. It's like we're going in circles, right? It's the same problems every time. And I'll go to 2. One of them is Gregg, right? I think the thing is the mistakes. Let's talk about John Brooks first to make my point. John Brooks made some individual mistakes that were on him. And I can't blame Gregg for that. But the buildup that led to his mistakes were tactical issues with the team. And you can't ignore that. Even though some people want to ignore it and talk about how Brooks shouldn't even be in the national team, which is complete nonsense. He is still our best center back. He is playing Champions League. Wolfsburg is the best defense in Bundesliga right now and was one of the best last season. So I think Gregg's tactics doesn't get the best out of most of our player pool. And that goes to what Justin said, what you said. Sometimes it's playing players out of position. Sometimes players are on their position but are not executing the role they're used to in their club. The other issue I want to talk about is very quickly, it's just the size of the roster, right? You can bring more guys, and that came back to bite us eventually. He even had to bring in Jackson Yule as if that was going to do something, right? So I hope he learned, and I hope he brings anywhere from 28 to 30 players in the next roster. He could have had a few guys that could have at least been there as an option from the bench. So I think the roster size is the problem. I think he learned the lesson because he did have to end up calling Sean Johnson at one point and Jackson Yule.
Yeah.
We'll see.
But it's not just the size of the roster. It was our refusal to make substitutions. Because if you're talking about the first, we knew Tim Weah was out before, they even met up. And we knew that Christian Pulisic had COVID. So already your roster went from 26 to 24 long before, anything even started. We didn't replace Tim Weah. Right. And then after the El Salvador game, I think we lost 3 or 4 more guys. So, and we still didn't replace until after the Canada game. And our replacement was just Jackson Yule as a 6.
And Pete, let me add one thing before some people counter this argument. They're going to say in World Cup, you can only bring 23 and you can't replace once it has started, which is true. But here's the thing. You play according to the regulation and you can do it now. So do it.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the point.
Absolutely. Hopefully we see a bigger roster in the future. There are so many issues that I want to talk about, and I'm trying to not step on your guys' toes, but I think Gregg's poor use of substitutions in the first two games. And it's not really just substitutions. It's Gregg's refusal to adapt. For example, I'll just give you an example. Against Canada, we saw Leggett most of the first half sit next to Tyler Adams and help with the build-out, which I don't think is really his strength, right? He doesn't really progress the ball forward when he's helping with the build-out. And for the last 10 minutes of that first half, Sebastian Leggett was playing a lot closer to the final third and connecting a bit more with some of the more attacking players. Now, I don't think Sebastian Leggett should be a starter for the national team. But if you are going to use him, it makes more sense for him to be involved higher up the field. Because although he cannot progress the ball very well through the thirds, when he has players around him he can combine with in the final third, he can find moments to be effective. They're not frequent enough for my liking, and I do believe we have better options, but at least if you're going to play him there. And so he was threatening in those last 10 minutes of the game, created that good ball for, I believe it was Brendan Aronson, who then set up Christian Pulisic, who hit the post. And so I thought, well, in the second half, if I'm Gregg, I'm telling him we need you higher up the field. Don't sit next to Adams and help with the build out. You already have Acosta doing that. But instead, in the second half, we saw Leggett do exactly that. Sit right next to Tyler Adams, and it just created this massive gap between the three, and not just Leggett, by the way. Acosta was back there. It was almost like a flat three guys playing as sixes, trying to help with the build-out. And so there was zero connection to our forward line, and that never changed throughout the game, even despite the substitutions. So it's not just the lack of substitutions, it's the lack of adapting in real time to what's happening on the field. We saw him fix his own mistakes against Honduras. But for me, that was still a really big issue. And it's a big issue because it doesn't only apply to this, one window. It speaks to future windows too. And if Gregg will continue to do that, we may continue to suffer because of that. So that's a massive issue. The second issue that I identified, and this is partially on Gregg, but partially also on the players, was some refusal to do the dirty work that CONCACAF requires. I thought there were moments where the team didn't really understand that this is CONCACAF and you have to be ready for a scrap, and that all the talent in the world can only go so far if you're not willing to do the dirty side of the game, And what I find interesting is I felt that came from sometimes our more experienced players like DeAndre Yedlin or John Brooks, whereas some of our best players in this tournament were Anthony Robinson, Tyler Adams, Ricardo Pepe, Miles Robinson, guys with very little CONCACAF experience, right? And so what we had heard before was you cannot have all these young players. You need the experienced heads who have experienced CONCACAF before. We didn't really see that for some of those players. And so I am hoping that in the last three games, they did learn that there is a certain approach and mentality that you have to go into CONCACAF games with. But the fact that we didn't see that from the beginning was disappointing. And something that I think Gregg is going to have to talk about with the players. So those are the issues, guys. I'm sure there's more. I want to kind of talk about solutions now to some of those issues, right? Talk about what we said were problems and what are possible fixes. Justin, you talked about your two issues. The first one being our lack of ability to create chances. Could you elaborate more on, if you were Gregg, how would you fix that? Because it's easy to talk about problems. We all do. Let's talk about potential solutions.
A lot of the things that we've been talking about the last couple of minutes are connected. So going back to Filippo's point, it starts with calling up a larger roster so that you have more players available to play that shuttling role in central midfield, the guys who are going to receive from the back line, and then be able to bring it forward, be able to give it to Reyna, Pulisic, Aronson in those good, dangerous positions. So it starts with calling up a larger roster. I'd like to see 30 guys, 31. Maybe that's a little too many. I think 28 is probably a minimum right now. I'd like to see one extra at each position group so that you're ready, because we saw you're going to lose guys. This past window was probably a little bit of an aberration in terms of how many guys we lost and how quickly, but that's going to happen and we have to be prepared. And the plan should not be, okay, well, Acosta can play 6, 8 right back and left back. Okay, we have Aronson can come to central midfield. we want to push Reyna up to the wing. These shouldn't be our backup plans. We need players who can play the defined role, who are ready to go. So we have these guys who can improve the midfield. The other parts are to simplify the tactics and just to keep players in their best positions. It's really not all that complicated. You know, we're talking about how the national team should be. Gregg knows more about soccer than I will ever know about in my life. It's not that he's lacking knowledge or anything like that. He understands the game. He knows a lot about the game, at least. I'll put it that way. And sometimes it's just about simplifying it so that it's not so much for the players to have to learn, so that the onboarding isn't so difficult for bringing in those younger players like Pepe, Caden Clark, other youngsters who could get involved during this cycle. But I'd like to see Luca De La Torre, Julian Green. I think those two would be great for this next window. It seems like Reyna is probably going to be out injured still, most likely for October, but I'd like to see him in the midfield when he's back too. So I think if you get LD, LT, if you get Green, maybe one more for that 8 position group. And I'm not quite sure who I'd bring as that last player. Maybe Busio, Pamukal, Cappy. I'm not quite sure who the 5th player is, but having some of those guys.
Possibly.
Yeah, Ferreira could probably do it, at least on the offensive side.
Yeah.
But some of those players who are going to actually progress the ball forward. If you want to bring Leggett, that's fine. If you want to bring Roldan, that's fine. But Leggett's been more of a final third player. Roldan's played mostly out wide, or at least has been more effective out wide. So if we're going to have a midfield that is actually going to progress the ball and put Pulisic, Aronson, Weah in those positions, then we need the players who are specifically suited to do that.
Right. Yeah, no, and to your other point about, you know, having players in their best positions, I don't think it's a debate anymore, at least it shouldn't be, that Serginho Dest has to play on the right. You know, his poor performances on the left for the U.S. combined with Anthony Robinson's excellent camp should not make that an issue anymore, in my opinion. And the insistence on using him on the left, where he's proven to be ineffective on both sides of the ball, is a worry. You know, now, of course, he did get beat that one time by Alphonso Davies, you know, was a problem. But if we look at him in attack, he was so much better and more threatening already in the 20, 30 minutes that he played, just being in the position, you know, he plays for one of the best teams in the world. So I think that's huge.
And on that note, most of our best players want to cut inside. Pulisic, Aronson, Reyna, they want to come inside. When Dest is on the left, he's also going to want to come inside onto his right foot. If you keep him on the right, he gives you that outlet out wide.
That's a huge tactical consideration. And let's just talk about that for a second. You also have a forward, let's say, Gregg likes his forwards to come very deep on the ball, right? He likes his wide players to pinch in. He plays with 3 in midfield. And now you have a right-footed left back who also wants to pitch in. Where's your width coming from, right? You're leaving it up to one fullback on the right, depending on who it is. That's not enough. And when teams get very congested in the middle, they're easy to defend. Much easier to defend. When you had Anthony Robinson coming up the left, he was an outlet in possession and also forced them to stretch their defense because they had to pull wide to then defend those fullbacks. And now you have more spaces in the middle. So that's a huge, huge consideration as well, tactically, that I don't think is talked about enough. And I think it's a great point, Justin.
I wanna before I go to my points, because they're very quick, I want to add to one thing Justin said. He's right in the sense of Gregg Berhalter having more soccer experience, professional soccer experience, than any of us ever had, and probably that any of us will ever have. Mm-hmm. But just because you have that experience and that knowledge doesn't mean you're better than anyone at understanding the game, whatever. Because I can give you an example. You can go to business school. You can be a business PhD professor. It doesn't mean you can run a business better than that guy right there, or better than a guy that never went to school for that. As a matter of fact, a lot of the guys that own businesses, they didn't really go to business school, right? The ones that build it from scratch. So Gregg has that experience. It doesn't mean he has the best ideas, the best reactions, the best way to execute it, because being a soccer coach is a lot more complex than just the tactics and everything. There's player management, there's ideas, and how do you execute that? How do you get that idea that you have and put it into the player's head, right? Mm-hmm. How do you do all of that? And he can have all the experience in the world, just like Frank de Boer has all the experience in the world, and you can still be a crap coach. Now, that's just my opinion on it, and I think Gregg Berhalter's resume kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah. And just to build on that, Filippo, it's not just getting the player to understand their role, but putting a player in a position where the role that you ask them to play is based on their strengths and weaknesses. So asking players to play roles that suit them is a huge problem for Gregg. right?
Yeah.
Does this role take advantage of that player's strengths and also cover for their weaknesses? That's huge with coaching, right? And I think that's a big part of it.
Well, and if experience in soccer is everything to be a good coach, then any former player can be a good coach, which is absolute nonsense to say. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm not saying I know more than Gregg. I'm not saying anyone here knows more than Gregg. But I think Gregg probably lacks in some areas of coaching that are not at the same level as his soccer experience, which that he has a lot more than we have, and probably a lot more than we'll ever have, and a lot more than 99% of the fan base will ever have. But it doesn't mean he doesn't lack on other areas, which clearly he does. Just to put my two parts to solutions, one is the larger roster, and the other one is the keep it simple, stupid for Gregg again.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
One more on Filippo's piece. I totally agree. And that I stopped myself after I said understanding of the game, because that's different than knowledge about the game. Mm-hmm. There was a rant that was on Stars and Stripes after one of these more recent games, and it was so good I literally have it saved on my calendar to reference it. And there were a couple of quick quotes from that really talk about what you're saying, Filippo. This person said, "There's joy in the football. That's a big part of being a good international manager, is to make sure there's joy in the football. I'm not talking about joga bonita, tiki-taka, a certain style of play, just that it's enjoyable, that it's this release, both for the players and for the fans." And he said, "For me, the general rule is that the more a manager tries to micromanage and complicate the football, the more joy he sucks out of the football." And this was his problem with Berhalter. He said to him, "Soccer is like a Rube Goldberg machine, filled with empty semantics, platitudes, and mental gymnastics. That's not what this generation of talent needs." I thought it was so well put, talking about the tactical approach and understanding of trying to, do you have a system, a rigid system that you're trying to fit players into, or do you look at your players and try to find the best places for them and let it flow from the players that you already have?
And there's that word flow is important, because flow is a state of mind, right? Being in flow. And it sounds a little woo-woo, but there are actually scientists who've done studies on this. Being in flow allows you to react instinctively to situations. When you're confident, when your role is simplified, when you're not having to overthink anything, you usually perform best. And I think that's huge, especially at the international game where you have so little time to work on, complex tactics. And I think Gregg is a very cerebral guy. He sees things as X's and O's and tactics and ideas, but it doesn't always translate. In fact, it almost never translates onto the field. And I think that's a huge issue with him. Just to talk about my 2 points, the first one is him adapting. It's like, what is the solution? The solution is he has to learn to adapt quicker, right? And to his credit, against Honduras, he did. But it was so obvious that it wasn't working.
His job was on the line.
Yeah, his job was on, in my opinion, was on the line. I don't know how USSF felt. Like, if we had lost that game and got 2 points from the first window, I like to believe he would have been fired, but I honestly don't think he would have. I think they would have given him October to fix it, which could have been perilous. But yeah, it was so bad that he did eventually fix it, but that's not good enough, right? We can't be like, our coach, when it's so bad, when he makes terrible mistakes, will eventually fix them. That's not a good enough. This is our country and this is our national team on the line for a World Cup. It has to be better. We've seen in the past that Gregg can learn, but he often takes too long and it's too slow. Now, maybe in CONCACAF that won't punish you, but guess what? In a World Cup, if you don't adapt quickly, that you will be punished, because the quality of opposing teams will punish you. So that was a huge one. And then the other one was just mentality. I talked about the mentality of some of the players. I think that also that mentality. Okay, so what I said is they didn't look like they were ready for a scrap. Let me articulate that better. I think that there was a hesitancy and tentativeness to some of the players' actions on the field, and sometimes that looks like a lack of desire or interest, and that may be the case. But to give them the benefit of the doubt, that can also be the result of a lack of a clear understanding of your role and confidence in the role you're being asked to play, right? When you get asked to do a task that you're not happy with, or that doesn't suit you, or that you don't clearly understand, or you don't really believe in, that can then affect how your body language and performance on the field, plays out. And we saw a lot of frustration with Gregg, in several games from different senior players, and even comments that they made afterwards. Whether they directly called Gregg out, there was a clear frustration, I think, with a lot of players of what we're doing isn't working. Pulisic himself said it. We need new ideas. We saw John Brooks getting frustrated in the opening 20 minutes against Canada. We saw Adams, and so there are clearly issues where the players maybe don't either fully understand or agree with certain things, and that may have affected performances as well. But so long as we bring the same mentality that we brought to Nations League and Gold Cup, which is we're ready for the scrap, we're ready for the dirty side of the game, then I think we will be okay in the next window. So yeah, those are really the solutions that we would come up with to fix things, guys. Let's now go ahead and talk about two players each who we feel increased their stock in this window. And I'll start this time, if you guys don't mind. Ricardo Pepe. It feels like an obvious one. And yes, it is only one game, for sure. It was a game away with a massive pressure on us to win. He's 18 years old. To come up with a performance like that was amazing. Now, there are some people who say, he is our locked-in starter for the USMNT. I wouldn't go quite that far. I think that performance has earned him some more starts to then prove that he is our locked-in starter, right? How those performances play out, we will see. But he is young, and it's possible that we'll have some games where he won't perform well. And we will probably overreact to that as well and say, he's not it. Get rid of him, as we can sometimes do as a fan base. But I think he definitely did a lot to up his stock. The other player was Anthony Robinson for me. There are still questions about some of his ability in the build-outs when we're trying to build out of the back. However, we didn't really do that in this window, and I don't think we will when Matt Turner is in goal. I don't think we're even going to try. So if you're going to play that kind of a game where Anthony Robinson's remit is to bomb up the field, provide width to combine with the attack, get good crosses in, then he suits that very well. And I also saw improvement on his 1v1 defending, which has been an issue in the past. So I think Ricardo Pepe and Anthony Robinson are my two guys. Justin.
Yunus Musa. Sometimes not being in camp is the best way to increase your stock, especially when so many of the players who are in camp aren't performing to the level that we've seen with club. Kind of back to your point about Pepe, he is going to have games that aren't as good. So does Christian Pulisic. So does Weston McKinney. The key is for us to not try to discard players because one performance isn't as good. But I think that we saw the need for someone in midfield to be able to receive and then turn on the ball, turn forward, not just play it back, but to turn forward, to be able to even go past a player on the dribble, and then to be able to key the attack, like we've talked about. It's really all I've talked about today. Musa is a player who is perfect for that role. Reyna and McKinney are the other two who can do it well. Reyna, I think, looks like will be out, so Musa's importance is only going to grow. And I think that the not having your stock fall by not being with poor performances or being with the team during poor performances could apply to Matthew Hoppe and Chris Richards as well. We've seen them look good. Hoppe's Gold Cup was really good. We didn't get to see him translate it into the team the way that Turner and Miles Robinson and Acosta got to see this window. But I think people are very excited, rightfully so, to see Hoppe with the full team. As far as a player who was actually in camp, I can talk about Miles more. He's just a very, very solid defender. I do think he needs to improve on the ball. It seemed like he was relying more on Brooks to actually find the passes to go into the midfield to break the lines. But he has a nice skill set in his ability to drop his shoulder and actually push past the first defender, force a midfielder to step to him, and then be able to lay it off. So it's interesting between he, Brooks, and Richards. Ideally, those would be the three I think that would start all of our qualifying games. I'm sure that they won't, that we'll need McKenzie, Miazga, others. But I think Miles obviously improved his stock.
Yeah. Okay, Filippo?
So I'm going to do the same as Justin, go with one guy outside of camp and one inside of camp, because the ones in camp, you guys pretty much covered all of them at this point. But in camp, to me, it's a guy that it seems like his stock couldn't go up more, but I think it did, Tyler Adams, because out of all of our stars, he was the consistent one, right? He was good in all three games, at least as far as I remember. He was good in every game. Showed how important he is and showed leadership, maturity at a young age. So to me, Tyler Adams' stock went up even more than it was already, if that's even possible. He was already a lock-in starter. Now he's, what did you say more? He was a key player already. What is he now? Captain Adams? I don't know.
I believe he should be captain.
Yeah,
Yep.
so his stock went up, especially because a few guys that were key players, their stock went down. Not always because of the field stuff, like Weston McKinney out of the field issues. I still think he's a lock and starter, but yes, it doesn't help his case what happened. The other player I want to talk about is Joe Scally because so Yedlin was not reliable. Julian Araujo rejected a call and could go to Mexico. Reggie Cannon is having issues with his club, and Gregg didn't call him, wasn't match fit. And Serginho Dest once again showed to be very good on offense and not the most reliable player on defense. Joe Scally has been having some pretty good performances in Borussia, not Dortmund, there as a reliable. Um, he's laughing. uh, he's
A
being
German
pretty,
team.
yeah. I tried.
Mönchengladbach.
It's not Dortmund. It's just the other Borussia. But he's been holding on defense. So if you have a guy like Dest and a guy like Scally, you have more tactical flexibility. I need a
Mhm.
more defensive fullback. Scally, you're gonna get the job done. Dest, and I think we can count on both. Is Scally gonna get called up next camp? Right now, if I had a bet on it, no. But I think we could see him throughout qualifying get an opportunity if he continues to start, and it looks like he will, because all their fullbacks keep getting injured.
Yeah. It's quite telling that you say a starter for a Bundesliga team is unlikely to get called up in the next window. I think that's quite interesting.
Julian Green says hi.
Julian
Yeah,
Green says
but-
hello.
But here's the thing. Julian Green, they're going to continue that argument that he's in Bundesliga with a Bundesliga 2 team. Okay, fair enough, even though I think he should get called up.
Right.
But Joe Scally is on a very, very good Bundesliga team that fights to usually qualify to Europa League, and last year was even in the Champions League. So that says a lot, and maybe Gregg should call this kid in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm sorry. Who did it? Did you give yours yet?
Yeah,
we're now
I
going to
had-
talk about. You gave yours. We're going to talk about the two players that decreased their stock or whose stock went down. You want to start this time, Justin?
Sure. If there's a baby crying in the background, that's my 11-month-old. Enjoy,
Oh, no worries.
viewers, listeners.
No worries.
Yeah, I think Sargent's stock went down. Obviously, that's just part of Pepe skyrocketing. And Sargent has a lot of helpful tools. I'm a big fan of his. With the talent that we have available at the 9, I do think it's one of our weaker positions.
Mm-hmm.
So I was already excited to see Hoppy and Weah challenge Sargent and to see just those different skill sets, because we've seen a lot of Sargent relatively compared to those two. We've seen very little of Hoppy or Weah at the 9. Actually, none, as I'm talking. Neither of them have played the 9 at all. But even though he does combine well, even though he does drop well into midfield, he helps with the build-up, he gets in good positions, he hasn't found the net. He hasn't been a guy who's going to poach a goal, who's going to score a goal. And even though he does good work defensively, he presses well. Pepe does that too. He created a goal from the press. So I think that there's no way that Sargent stock isn't falling. It doesn't mean he's off the team. It doesn't mean he's not still a helpful and useful player. But as our talent continues to rise, it's going to make it more competitive, make it more interesting for these guys. So he's one. I think George Bello is the next one. He only played 45 minutes, and then he got subbed off for Anthony. And then Jedi went and had an incredible second half. So it's not that Bello was awful. I do think that he was partially at fault in the goal.
Can we talk about that real quick? Because I said on the post live stream that it was largely John Brooks's fault. Okay. And then I went on the rewatch and I watched it again. And I actually mea culpa'd myself because I said, yes, he was partially responsible. But at the end of the day, Bello is the one who loses his man for the goal, not John Brooks. He tucks inside and Bello doesn't follow. And that was Bello's only job. So maybe John Brooks could have won that challenge when he stepped up. But when you look at it on the turn, when that cross is being played in, we're 3v3. And if everybody stays with their man, we don't concede that goal.
Why did
Do
Brooks
you agree
have
or
to
not?
step up? Why did Brooks have to step up?
Because Sands and Acosta let them glide right through the center of the midfield.
Yeah, literally the pass was played right between Sands and Acosta. It was like they weren't there. And that's when Brooks had to step up. And he was on a yellow at that point, I believe, right? So he didn't want to foul the guy. So actually, I'm going to put that set for my opinion is 70% of that's on Bello and 30% is on Brooks. What do you guys think?
30 Acosta, 30 Sands.
How much is on Berhalter?
Yeah, that's, I mean, a huge part of it too. But if we're just talking about individual player responsibilities, I don't think I don't think Brooks is as culpable as Bello on that exact play. And certainly Sands, Acosta, and even Sargent, who lost the ball, are all partially culpable as well.
Yeah, I don't want to blame someone too much for losing the ball because players lose the ball all the time and it turns into counters. But I do think the DMs had to do, or if they were CMs in that formation, they needed to do more to stop it. And then the thing that frustrates me most, if Bello's not marking his man, or maybe if there's just too wide of a gap because he let the run happen, he's tracking someone else, those things happen in the game. But to stand with your hand up and ask for offside is one of my pet peeves, to see a player do that when the ball's going in the net. So I'm still high on Bello. I think he has a great future. It's interesting because he's undersized. You know, if you look back at the U17 World Cup squad in that was 2019, I think, that we had it. So you had Bello and a couple others like him. Kobe Hernandez is another, Gianluca Busio, who really haven't grown or developed that much. They haven't matured physically a ton since then. And then you have a few others like Gio Reyna and I think not even from that team, but Jonathan Gomez, same age group, guys who have really grown, they're a lot stronger. That physical development is so important. So Bello can still be a successful left back with being undersized. He wouldn't be the first small fullback to be great on the ball. Yeah. But I'd love to see Scally on the left, love to see Jonathan Gomez, some of these other faces get into camp. Just rotate guys in. Whoever plays best can stay. Let's see who our options are.
Yeah. Filippo, who are your two guys who decreased their stock?
So he talked about Josh Sargent, which was one of the ones I was going to mention. So I'm just going to go off that and say PFUC as well. Same situation as Sargent. Didn't score. I don't think he offered much of anything. And the rise of Ricardo Pepe doesn't help his case as well, along with Jassy Zardes coming back from injury. And that's not me saying I want Zardes in camp, but I do believe Gregg will bring Zardes in October as long as he's healthy. So I think PFUC definitely his stock went down. The other one, and then we can debate this. I'm going to say just one because I need to leave players for you as well. I'm going to say Yedlin. Also, I think his stock went down because he was there for experience and to not make mistakes, right? Maybe he wouldn't offer much creating or whatever it was or outstanding, but he was supposed to be the guy that wasn't going to make mistakes and be consistent, offer experience. I don't think he offered that, right? I don't think he offered much of that, and some of the mistakes were on him. So I think Yedlin's stock goes down. Plus, the fact that the right back position does have some interesting options, like we talked about Joe Scally.
Yeah, for sure. And Julian Araujo may still. We don't know yet.
Hopefully.
My two are very simple. The first one is Weston McKinney, and I don't want to go too hard on him, but as somebody who had been talked about as a leader, and honestly one of the more experienced guys in this group, he's been a professional now for 5 years, playing at some very high levels. He really let the team down with his actions. And that's why I was always hesitant when people said, make Weston McKinney the captain. I think that McKinney is a great guy, but I think he lives in the moment. And living in the moment is a beautiful thing, and we should all do it more. But reality is life does not exist in moments. It exists where moments have consequences. And I think in moments he made poor choices that impacted the team. And I think his stock 100% went down. I don't agree with Landon that it's irreparable. I don't agree with some of the takes out there that think he shouldn't be called up. I think he'll be back in October, and I think he should be. But I do think he's going to have to earn his stripes a little more with performances on the field and show that he can make up for what he did. So I think his stock definitely went down. The other person was Kellen Acosta. And I'm not saying this because I thought Kellen Acosta was bad in this camp. I just think that he regressed a little to his level, which is a good, willing, hardworking backup to Tyler Adams that can't really do much else. You know, the reason I say his stock went down is because after his last two performances in the Gold Cup, I saw comments like, he should start for us. He is Tyler Adams level, whatever. I think in this camp, we saw Kellen Acosta's limitations once again. In the build-out, he isn't great. In combination play, when time and space are compressed, he isn't great. We'll always work hard for you. We'll always do the dirty work. We'll always, be a guy that is a team player, and I think can be a good backup for Adams, at least for now. But I do think his stock dropped a little, and that's not any fault of his. He just regressed to what his level is, and I think his performances in this last window were a more realistic portrayal of who he is as a player than what we saw in the last 2 games of the Gold Cup. Because remember, most of the Gold Cup, the first 4 games, he wasn't that great. It was back to this level. And that's what I said after Gold Cup. Players can play above their level for short periods of time. And that's why we need large data sets when we evaluate players, not their latest game or their latest 45 minutes, So guys, we're almost running out of time here, but real quick, can we talk about the next window? Next window coming up, we play Panama away. That's the middle game, actually. Our first is home game against Jamaica, Panama away, and then home game against Costa Rica. What kind of points should we be expecting from this game? Should we as a fan base expect? And not necessarily based on these last 3 games. What are your expectations? What should we look for, Filippo?
So you're talking about expectations or what I want from us?
I guess that's what you want, our expectations, in my opinion. Like, if you feel this is what we should do, then those are expectations, right?
I personally think this is a camp, and again, I'm going to sound like I'm being overly optimistic. I think it's a camp to get 9 points. Two home games.
Yeah.
One is Jamaica, which they've been a mess, and apparently Coach Whitmore is still going to be there. And honestly, as much as we complain about Gregg Berhalter, I would never trade Berhalter for Whitmore. He is far worse. There's issues also outside of the field with the federation in Jamaica. There's a lot of problems going on there. They do have talent on paper. I'm going to give them that. They have some quality Premier League players, but they lost 3-0 with those players at home to Panama. And I know Panama has been a good surprise, right? They even tied Mexico. But losing 3-0 to Panama at home is, right? It's not.
Yeah.
It's not good, right? So I think we should beat Jamaica at home, regardless of the players that come. And then we play Panama away. That can be a tough game. That will be a tough game. Panama is tough away, and Panama was a surprise in the first camp. But it's also a winnable game. If we can beat Honduras coming back in the second half, we can do that to Panama as well. So it should be winnable. Is a draw acceptable? Maybe. If we win the other 2 games, the draw is not a disaster. But I think we should go for the win. And then Costa Rica at home. Costa Rica now is not the same as before. Okay? The team has aged. They also lost at home to Mexico, I believe, right? Mexico beat Costa Rica at Costa Rica. We're going to play them at home. There's no excuses. We need to win that game. So to me, to a bare minimum, 7 points. But I would like to see 9. And if we get 9, we're going to be reaching 14 points. That means we're going to be roughly 7 points away from qualifying. And it puts us in a good position to qualify. And the players will get more confidence. So 9 points will pretty much set the tone for us for the rest of qualifying.
Just curious, is that 7? You said 21 total. Is that 21 points meaning we're mathematically qualified, where no matter how any other results can go?
Mathematically, you won't be till probably the last camp, mathematically. Okay. But theoretically, 21 points based on previous data and some simulations, 22 is pretty safe for the 3rd spot.
Okay, I've seen some of the simulations.
Or worst case scenario, a 4th spot, which is not ideal, but 21 points, you're not going to finish 5th.
Okay.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
I've seen some of those simulations. That's helpful.
Yeah. Justin.
9 points. 7 is the bare minimum. We have to win our games at home.
Yeah.
You can make Mexico an exception to that. Maybe we really should be expecting to beat Mexico at home right now with our talent too. And we've gutted out 2 recent games against Mexico. We've won them in the old style, I won't say bunker and counter, but winning them with insane effort and set pieces.
Set pieces.
Yeah, set pieces are the key, right? In those games, we didn't have a good midfield. We weren't creating chances with the ball. So we really are at a point where we have the talent to do those things at home, even against Mexico. And again, we're not playing them this window. So as Filippo said, the away game is trickier, but I think it's important when people hear 9 points to know that that is not expecting perfection. We're not expecting perfect performances. There is such a talent gap as we face these teams that we can mess up in many ways and still get 3 points out of a game. We can gut out a 1-0 victory. Yes, exactly. That was half of a game that was really rough, 45 minutes that went well, and we won 4-1. So the margin of error is rather large, at least against some of these weaker teams. So that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy to win, and it's not going to be. But when we look at the players we have available, our expectations should be to beat these weaker teams. So we should expect 9. Anything less than 7 is really bad.
Yeah, especially after this last window, right? If we had gotten 9 points in this last window, 7 is more acceptable in the second window, right?
Yeah,
I'm with you. 9 is the expectation. 7 is the bare minimum. So you win your home games and draw away. That's what we've been told, is the acceptable amount. If you fail to win one of your home games, that in Panama has to be a must win. There is no excuses there. And remember, guys, it's not just qualifying for the World Cup. A lot of people want to make this just about qualifying. It's also about seeding and FIFA rankings, so that if we can get into and stay in the top 10 or top 7 or 8, I believe it is, we have a higher chance of getting an easier group in Qatar. So that's also something to be thinking about as we try to qualify, not just can we qualify. I know there's PTSD from not qualifying last time, but qualifying is not a success. Qualifying is the bare minimum for any kind of competence levels of soccer in this country, is qualifying for the World Cup. Well, we're trying to do more, right? We're trying to change the way the world perceives American soccer. And honestly, finishing top 2 should be the bare minimum, in my opinion.
And Pete, to add to what you said as well, World Cup qualifying is the last competition it's the last amount of competitive games we're going to have before World Cup. Because once we qualify, we're only going to have friendlies to build up to that. And we know friendlies are not perfect. They help, but they're not everything. Matches are different. So we also want to see throughout qualification and some progress on how we play. See that this team can go to the World Cup and do something. Can this team win a World Cup? No, not a chance at all, especially the way we're playing. The way we're playing, we don't get out of the group stage right now, probably, depending on the group we get. Yeah. So we want to see progress. So when we go to the World Cup, we're like, all right, this is a team that, if in form, things go well, we can get to a quarterfinals. I don't know, make a good run, play well, right? To build momentum to 2026.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's exactly it. Performance matters on top of result, right? Because performance is a better predictor of long-term success. And so if we scrap out 2 1-0 wins at home and then get a 0-0 draw in Panama, technically we'll have reached the quote-unquote bare minimum, but the same issues will remain of we don't really look very cohesive or full of ideas with the ball. Any last thoughts from either of you guys before we wrap this up?
It's just like you said, we got 5 points out of the window while having 5 really bad halves and 1 good half of soccer. Yeah. Just one other point, the better we can do in qualification, the more secure we are in the standings and the higher our expectations are that we're going to be defeating these weaker opponents, the more opportunities that's going to give us. There will be more breakout talents between now and December of next year. Caden Clark is going to the Bundesliga next year. I don't know that he's going to be the next generation Gio Reyna. I'm not saying that, but there will be more of the Reyna McKinney level players who are going to appear. And it will be helpful for the team if we can introduce those players in situations that are not necessarily do or die. So the more comfort we give ourselves, the more room we give ourselves, the more chances we have to have our truly most talented 23 players next December because of the chances to bring them in now, bring them in early.
Yeah, and to me, just the final thing is one thing Justin just said. We had 5 bad halves and 1 good half. I think we had a good half more because Honduras gassed out rather than we played well, because there were times that we weren't looking good in the second half. And I think one of the reasons why they gassed out and we didn't is we have depth, not thanks to Gregg, just because we have it. So what does that do? We were able to rotate some players, make subs, while Honduras has to play the same players every game. Surprisingly enough, Honduras at the very last game gassed out. They didn't gas out on the other games, but they gassed out on the third game. And that probably will happen quite a bit throughout qualifying. We might see a very tired Costa Rica game on the third game after playing so many games while we're rotating. So that's something people need to keep in mind. Our third games, a lot of the times we're going to see that, besides November, because there's only 2 games in that camp. The other camps have 3 games, so that will be more noticeable in future camps.
Yeah. And that's even one more reason to have as big of a roster as players are willing to come. Because if we get into that third game and Costa Rica is just really out of it, let's say it's going really well, we're up 3-0 and it's not even halftime. It's 40 minutes in. Now, if we want to, we bring in 5 fresh guys, maybe guys who aren't as tested or guys who we need to see more about. And now we're pulling out Pulisic, we're pulling out Dest. We're keeping them so that they're fresher and they're not at risk of getting injured. So it's not just about being able to have a deep squad so that we can put out our best possible team in every game. That's part of it. But there's also that aspect of resting our best players, keeping them safe from injury, and then you have the benefit of introducing the new players as well. So there's so many win-wins by having more than 26 players or more than 24 players on your squad.
Certainly. Guys, we're coming up on an hour here. Thanks so much for joining me, Justin and Filippo. Guys, if you haven't already, subscribe to Filippo on YouTube. I will put Justin's Twitter handle. Is that the best place to find you, Justin?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at KickSwish.
Twitter at KickSwish. I'll put it in the description so you can find him, give him a follow. Lots of good thoughts and content. Guys, we have another exciting window coming up. Let's look forward to it. Thanks for joining me today, and we will talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, guys.